We are live for episode 36, Networking, How the Marketer Markets Herself. Really excited to have our friend Dina Baker, Fractional Chief Marketing Officer and Area Managing Partner for Chief Outsiders, joining us today. Dina, before we dive in, as you know, we always like to ask people, what's one cool networking event you've been to recently?
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you all of you for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I'm actually, and it's not because Steven's here that I'm going to mention the event, but he helped me create a networking event that I called Executive Blending. And it was for a very small group of people. We had 8 CEOs who had never met each other before, and many of whom I'd never met before, who I managed to curate and invite to an event where we had wonderful executive blending. The executives blended with each other and had wonderful food. And then we sat down for dinner, and Stephen taught us to do wine blending, and everyone created their own custom blend of wine, and then more networking. And first of all, I've already got a piece of business from that, and another one in progress.
Oh, wow.
From just 8 people.
That's good.
And that was just a couple of months ago. And the point of that is networking isn't about going to big events. Mm-hmm. Networking is about creating relationships. And what I did there is I gave people the opportunity to create relationships with each other. And in doing so, they learned something about me and wanted to dig deeper with me. I wasn't selling anything. I was giving them an opportunity to build relationships. And that's what networking really is.
I love that. I think that's so true. It's a really good point, as I've been sort of like, because of the holiday, the July 4th holiday and some vacation time, sort of like retooling my networking approach. So I'm going to definitely take that to heart. Dina, before we dive into the topic itself, can you tell us a little bit about what you do with Chief Outsider?
Sure. So as an area managing partner, I spend a portion of my time really matching my colleagues, who are 120 of the best chief marketing and chief sales officers in the country, with extraordinary resumes, exclusively to Chief Outsiders, matching them to CEOs of mid-market companies and nonprofits to help them achieve the growth trajectory they're looking for. And that is incredibly gratifying. If I didn't have all those colleagues, imagine how many fewer companies I would help. And then I also work as a fractional chief marketing officer myself, and get to join executive teams and help them make things happen and achieve their goals, which is incredibly gratifying.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, let's dive in. So tell us, the title of the episode was How the Marketer Markets Herself, and you've sort of started to dig into that, but would love to hear sort of your thoughts on kind of how I think we don't always, as marketers, think about networking as part of the marketing mix, but it really is, right?
It is, and particularly it is in professional services. I mean, there are certain things that are much more transactional. In professional services in particular, you are selling minds and relationships and expertise. Mm-hmm. And that means trust is a huge factor. And that's why I said networking is about building individual relationships. It's not about going to big events. Do I go to them? Yes. But I went to one recently, and the networking really happened this morning when one person I met there got together with me for coffee. Mm-hmm. And that's networking. The other is seeing if there's someone to network with that makes sense for both parties. Marketing through building these relationships is about win-win. It's about something that makes sense for both parties. Yep. So how I market myself, I sat back and said, well, what is me? Mm-hmm. And you may know that most weeks on Fridays, I have a little video that I put up called What I Learned This Week. What is a huge part of who I am is that it's really important to me to always be learning and to bring that to my work I don't want to be stale, and I don't want to bring stale ideas to the table. So as I thought about how I market myself, building around that idea that I'm a learner and that learning, through that learning, I bring value to others was hugely important. So I've built a lot of what I've done in my thought leadership around that. So I think it's really important to start by asking not only yourself, but the people you do work with and for, what they see as that essence that you bring that differentiates you from others. Think of yourself as your brand and do that insight work, and then build what you do around the answer to that question.
So I love that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that's great. And obviously, yes, I've seen those and they're great, which I'm sure that's not always the most comfortable thing to get out there and do. A lot of people fear the video type stuff. But I'm curious, just kind of over time, how have you seen your networking evolve? Other than, of course, those videos, but I imagine there's other areas as well.
So first of all, networking is about business development, which is a very specific part of marketing. And it's where marketing and sales, meet and overlap. And many people who are in marketing believe that, well, I don't want to be in sales. I want to sort of enable sales. I don't want to do that. But it turns out I love business development. Mm-hmm. So part of what's changed is finding that out and figuring that out. When I joined Chief Outsiders 3 years ago, I would not have assumed that I would have made the choice to become an area managing partner and spend a chunk of my time on business development, but I love it. And I love it because it's about being curious. And there's a phrase we like to use at Chief Outsiders: be interested and then be interesting. It's really about asking questions and being interested about others, not about showing off who you are and what you know. And that is business development that I love. So I will go to networking events. I do go to some large ones. I prefer smaller ones, but I don't like the din and the noise of the large ones. But I go to them and I learned gradually how to make them work for who I am. And it's not about walking around and trying to say hello to everybody. Mm-hmm. It's about getting the lay of the room and then setting myself a goal of, I need to have 3 meaningful conversations tonight. I don't need to meet 20 people. I need to have 3 meaningful conversations. I might meet 5 people to have those 3 meaningful conversations. Yep. And I can leave them. I meet that goal. So that took time for me to learn versus trying to work a room. And it's been much more successful for me. The other piece is learning who it's most important for you to meet. And that is something you learn gradually, and it's going to be different for each of us.
No, I love that last part. I fully agree. The who is the right. Yeah, that's something that I've been working on myself, and 100% agree with. And I'll tell you, don't forget something else.
No, it's okay. Dina's just saying some really wonderful things, and there's a lot of comments that I could say and questions, but I would agree with you. I share the enjoyment of smaller networking sessions. And I also agree with your statement of the network isn't going to a large event. The networking is the coffee afterwards. It's building that relationship, learning about one another, building that trust. So I hear you out completely on that. My question to you is your point on branding yourself. I think that's so important. I talk about that a lot. How did you, and you also brought up trust, right? So you need to distill trust with a prospect, if you will, and create that relationship. What has that looked like for you between building your own brand and then creating that trust? How do you go about that? Because I think there's sometimes a gap with folks of, okay, I had the coffee, but where now, right? And how do I progress that? So what do you do? What's your kind of perspective on that?
To me, the most important, well, there's two pieces to trust, actually. One is we all have networks that go years back. And so there are people who already know us, even if I haven't spoken to them, much in the last 20 years, but at some point they worked with us and they knew our work. I sold an engagement last week because somebody I worked with 30 years ago recommended me. And honestly, if somebody says, I've known this person for 30 years and I think you should talk to her, the trust transfers very easily. Not that you don't have to rebuild it, but it does transfer easily. So part of that trust is leveraging the relationships you already have, and remembering, though, at all times, that is a two-way street. I didn't go to this former colleague saying, what can you do for me? I went saying, this is what I'm doing now. This is what you're doing now. Let's talk about how we can be helpful. And you have to go into it where you really mean that, whether it is a long-time relationship or a new relationship. So one of the things is I'm often talking to people who have needs that aren't the ones I'm going to meet. I had a conversation with a prospect today who, in the middle of it, said, by the way, do you know anyone who does this? And I said, yeah, I do know people who do that. Let's talk about what you're looking for so I can connect you to the right person. I may or may not get business from this prospect for myself right now. But the fact that what I'm focused on is what he needs and cares about, that builds trust, that I'm not focused on what I want from him. And another piece of that is having a set of relationships where you can make those recommendations, because my recommendation is my reputation. Mm-hmm. And I am very careful about recommending people who I know will uphold my reputation in the quality of the work that they do. So, yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your question, but trust is built by not being about yourself.
The deposits, right? That's what I usually call it, is adding those. I think there doesn't need to be a term. It's just being a good person and helping someone out. But to add a term to it, I usually say those deposits. So that answers perfectly.
Yeah.
We use something, and I'm looking to my side because I want to make sure I get it right. We use something we call that is called the trust equation. It's from Trusted Advisors. Mm-hmm. And at Chief Outsiders, we focus on developing our skills around this. And we also focus, when we interview potential people for Chief Outsiders, on whether they can function within the trust equation. It's basically that trust comes from an equation where the numerator is credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, and the denominator is self-orientation. So credibility is table stakes, right? That's you do what you say you're going to do. Or actually, that's what you're doing. Reliability is you do what you say you're going to do. Those two are table stakes. Yep. Intimacy is about somebody who can say to me in the middle of a call, I'm also having this other problem. Do you know anyone? They're willing to share their issues with me. They're willing to have this open conversation, even beyond the thing that I'm there to work on. Self-orientation is the denominator because we want to reduce it, right? You get a greater outcome if you reduce the denominator. So it means trying to not focus on yourself, trying to always be focused on the other. And the ability to really think about your interactions around particularly that intimacy and self-orientation piece that are, that go beyond what's necessarily measurable, as I delivered this when I said I would, and it actually was good work. Mm-hmm. That is what's going to build that trust.
So I'm really fascinated by this, what you're talking about here. And I love that equation is really a helpful way to visualize it. But at some point, you have to make a shift from we're just having a conversation to I'm making a sale. But you need to do that in a way, to your point, that doesn't come across as self-serving. So how do you make that shift? How do you personally make that shift, and how do you recommend to people to make that shift?
So that's sort of that, the be interested before being interesting. It doesn't mean you should never get to being interesting. If you ask somebody enough questions about their business, they're going to eventually say, so tell me about what you do.
Right.
You have the opportunity then to tell them what you do. And by the way, I'm not making this up. The person at Chief Outsiders who talks about this the best is Karen Hayward. She's brilliant at understanding how the importance of this. But you now have a whole lot of data from what they've just told you. And assuming you cared enough to really be listening, you're then telling them what you do in the context, when they ask, in the context of what problems they have. And I can describe what I do saying, for example, this issue that you have with organic growth, I can contextualize it. And that morphs into a discussion of, if they're ready, it morphs into a discussion of, can you talk to me about how you might work with a company like mine?
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, I like that. I think it very much ties into, certainly my goal is the same, right? To understand exactly that, because that changes every conversation, right? Every time you describe yourself is very different. And so differently, that's why I dislike being the one to go first. And, a lot of times, and that's the case, right? A lot of times, you go. It's like, no, really, depending on what you say will very much impact how I can come back and relate and everything else. Now, of course, the converse is also true, but it is nice to really hear that from the other person first.
And if someone does say first, tell me about what you do, you can give a very brief answer and say, I'd like to hear more about your business.
Right.
Yep.
It's very easy to turn that around. And that might sound a bit like a ploy, but first of all, it's fascinating to learn about people's businesses. It really is. It's just so interesting. And then when you come back to what you do, it's a richer conversation.
Yep. 100%.
It's selling without selling, right? I think to your point, being naturally interested, because I agree with you. It's incredibly fascinating learning about, yes, people on a personal note, but then their businesses, especially when that's, an area, something that you really enjoy. So being able to ask about it, be genuinely curious, as you're mentioning, it gives you the answers. And I think that's the best business developers or sales, I do quotes, because you don't have to be a salesperson to sell, right? Are the ones that don't do that. They don't come across as salesy, because you're telling me your gaps and I'm going to naturally just say solutions. Maybe that some of the solutions are things I can do, but maybe they're what you can do, Stephen can do, Jeff can do. And then you're being able to just be a full service provider, in all the ways.
I mean, you're really being a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You're being a friend by saying to somebody, here's resources I know about based upon what you said you need.
Yeah.
So I will say, if you're not naturally curious, you probably shouldn't be engaging in networking. It won't work. I don't believe you can fake that.
And it's interesting. I'm thinking about a call that I had today that I would say, I'm sure that I'm not the only one that sometimes has calls that are like total duds. This was a total dud. and it was a
natural.
dud. It was a dud because it was me and my brother and somebody that he had met. We were having this conversation and we were asking questions, and probably like 30 minutes into this or so, it was like, there was no angle that we could see how to help this person, nor were there's any curiosity coming back in the other direction. And so it was like, at some point, you just start to feel like, okay, get me off this call.
So what did you do? What did you do with that?
So we ended up sort of turning around and sort of saying, hey, how can we maybe get some referrals? How can we, we sometimes help people with referrals or whatever, just offering some help. They were doing, and they were like, yeah, sure, and whatever. And then kind of just, the call sort of ended and whatever. There was no, it was like, I don't know, it's happened to me before, and I hadn't really, until you were talking just now, I don't think I'd ever put my finger on it. Is like at some point the conversation will, sort of, you're asking questions, right? And you're getting information. And at some point, usually what happens is you hear some problem that, to your point, either you can help or somebody who can help with. And when that doesn't happen, it starts to feel like a slog. I don't know. Have any of you run into like recently bad, business development calls? I don't know.
I mean, so I've run into calls where people only want to talk about what's working, and that makes it very hard to understand where they need help. And I'll say, this is great. It sounds like things are going exactly the way you want them to go, exactly the way you need them to go. That's really exciting. I'd love to hear how you made that happen.
Right.
And either they will tell you how they made that happen, or more likely they'll say, well, actually, this isn't quite good. You basically are calling them on the bluff. But sometimes it's hard for people to say, I have a problem. Right. And so acknowledge what they are telling you, which is that everything's great.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. It's funny that you say that, because that happened to me last week. I got a call with somebody. I did exactly that, just not even thinking about it. Like, it was just like this person had it all together. And I just was like, wow, that's amazing. I'd love to understand how you did that so that when I'm helping other people, I can, give advice. And that actually got the conversation to, sort of kickstarted it back up. But that's interesting.
I like that for the wine business. So you've never had a bad bottle of wine, huh? Interesting.
Liars. Too, a lot of people, I've seen this recently when I'm meeting with someone new, they'll ask me, like, how can I help you? Like, it's just a very genuine question of, like, introduce or knowledge. Or so I started doing that more up front, especially if it's not as engaging of a conversation, right? Everyone has different personalities. So if it's sometimes pulling teeth to a degree and wanting to get something, I'll say that. Especially if it's an industry, obviously, that I'm mainly focused in. And that sometimes helps too. And that, again, sometimes brings up gaps, like, oh, I have this issue. This is something that I would like to, meet someone on.
Right.
Et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, right? Where I found that to be the case is, number one, I do the same thing a lot, right? I wear a lot of hats, and including some volunteer type things too. But wearing those, right, I asked the question, especially like the Private Directors Association, right? Like, somebody's talking to me about that. It's, how can I help you? What are you looking for? How can I connect you? Those sort of things. Whether it's that, whether it's for a business objective, the interesting thing for me is the number of people who can't really articulate that. But then even beyond that, when it's like, okay, well, you're looking for this. Okay, I get that. Can you send a one-pager? Can you send a paragraph so that I can use that to introduce you? And they're like, yeah, just give me a week or so. Right. So anything that's adding friction, I think, is the thing that's really needs to be taken away in those, right? It's no, of course, here it is. You can do this and boom. But for me, that's really the interesting thing, is making it easy. Right? How do you?
Yes, you do want to make it easy. Sometimes people are adding friction intentionally. Sometimes you have to say, okay, they really don't want to engage, and just hear that.
Right.
I will say, if somebody has a specific need that I know I have someone I can help them with, that's fine. I am a little put off when in a first conversation with someone, they say, look, who in my LinkedIn group do you want an invitation to? Because it seems too early in a relationship to, from their standpoint, to trust that I'm a good person to expose their contacts to. And I don't want to be in that position of exposing my contacts just broadly to them before I really know more about them. That's different from a very specific need. Can you connect me to someone who knows about wine? And I would say, yes, I know the perfect person.
That's a really,
And by the way, your intro was a very unsolicited, so I appreciate that, Dina. That was not a paid advertisement.
but Dina, I want to pick up on what you just said, because I think that's really interesting, and I've thought about this point a lot. Is that there is something about certain calls that I've been on that were the conversation was fine, and yet I left feeling like I did not like that conversation. And what I've sort of put my finger on is this idea that when somebody puts you in a position within the call where you are not equals having a conversation, trying to sort of get to know each other and help each other, and they've sort of made you like one down, that I don't like. And I think there's a way that sometimes with some, like, I think it's fine to sort of say, how can I help you, whatever, but when it's done in a way that is like, hey, I want to legitimately help you, but when I sort of like, I've had people do that to me where like, how can I help you? Kind of like, you're nobody, or like that I don't like.
The tone matters and where it's mentioned. So I should have prefaced that too, right?
Yeah.
Like all of my experiences, it's been very, very kind. Like it was towards the end of the conversation. We did, all the things. But I agree with you, Jeff and Dina, in the sense of, sharing connections. If someone says that up front to me and I don't know them, I'm right there with you, Dina, in the sense of, that shows how they care about their relationships. And that's not a good thing, right? Like, I'm not going to just share out contact information and just waste someone's time without knowing there's going to be a benefit or interest or knowing someone well enough. Same thing with providing a service, right? If someone needs a CPA, I'm not going to introduce someone I just met one time because I want to work with them. I'm going to introduce folks that I've already worked with and I stand by, again, showcasing credibility.
Yep.
And it's really, to me, about there being transactional versus relationship based, and networking by definition is relationship based. Business development and marketing, it is not transactional. I actually created, talking about how the marketer market ourselves, I created a 2x2 essentially, that on the horizontal axis is from what I'm most comfortable with to what I'm least comfortable doing. And on the vertical axis is from basic awareness all the way up to closing, right? And I charted all of the different activities that should live in that, around the relationships I build with people and how I interact with them, from doing my video to actually going to networking events to having coffees and all. I charted it on there. So I knew that I needed to get much more comfortable with certain things to get from the awareness to close more effectively. And then I forced myself to gradually move little by little into my discomfort zone, and in a very targeted way, because I knew where in those quadrants I was most lacking. So it's not just, these are, things you do and they're all good ideas. It's about putting together a plan that then turned into a plan that I do this many times and this many times. And that's based on how many meetings do I have to have in order to reach my goals. So, we're talking about the nature of networking, but it has to have a strategic base.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I've let this go a little bit longer because we're having such a great conversation, but it has flown by as promised. So Dina, we're going to do our wrap up. As I mentioned, we like to do our wrap up by having each person talk about some cool networking event you are going to in the next few weeks. So we'd love to hear from you first.
Okay.
What's coming up?
Is it okay if it's not in Boston?
Oh, it's okay.
I don't know if you can call it wicked if it's not in Boston, but this is actually, I have developed a network of folks in the Pittsburgh area, and with them, spearheaded by Brooke Addis of Transform Labs, which is a fractional CIO CTO firm, and experts in cost reduction analysis and HR, we are going to put on a 3-part series for CEOs in August, October, and December. Growth in uncertain times, and then something that we haven't named yet on sort of a year-end workshop for thinking about planning for the year ahead, and then sort of a social event in December to help CEOs create their own support network, which was really inspired by my success with that event with Stephen, the idea of doing something for them to develop their own CEO network. And I love it because it's a series, so we're building relationships as we're doing this over time.
Yeah. Awesome. That sounds very cool. Dina, before I give my next event that's coming up, what is the best way if people want to reach out to you, connect with you? What's the best way?
The easiest way is to email me. I am fanatical about checking my email, and there's my email address.
Awesome. Perfect. I will say I have an event coming up, not this week, but I think it's the following week. It's called Not Your Average Networking Event. And so I'm really excited to find out. I don't quite know. It's going to be a little bit of a surprise, but actually the person who runs it is absolutely terrific and is going to be on this show, I think, in a couple months. But I'm excited. I don't know a lot about it yet, but I'm really excited to see what that looks like. And I will pass it over to Taylor.
Well, we're gonna have to hear the notes afterwards because now I'm very much anticipating what's gonna happen. I have it's an event. It's something that you're mentioning, Dina, a small dinner. There's 8 of us. Some lovely women from the construction and real estate realm. We're going to do dinner on Wednesday night. So very much networking. Some of us are familiar with one another. Some others are not. We're all in different areas of the industry. So these are just the nicest. I really enjoy something small. It's good conversation. You learn a lot about someone. I joined a book club last year because of one of these. So it's really fun. What about you, Stephen?
Well, along the same vein, I'm actually turning a bunch of the larger things into one-on-ones. So I have a handful of one-on-one afternoon, evening events this week. So nothing other than actually nothing big this week. So
wow.
One-on-ones are just as important. That's the next step.
It feels weird.
Yeah, with Stephen. I mean, anyway, well, thank you, Dina. This was a terrific conversation. Some great advice. Some. It's always great when we get like new thoughts, from people, and lots of great new stuff in this discussion as well. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all of you having me. It was fun.
Thank you,
Dina.
Bye.